All right, I am Dr. Wada, and this is Introduction to Psychology, and we're going to begin with Exploring Psychology Chapter 1. And Chapter 1 includes the people that have created psychology and made it what it is today, as well as the theories that began. Some worked, some didn't, and which ones we continue with to this day. So first we need to start out with what is the definition of psychology. This will be on your test. So, it is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Prior to psychology becoming an actual thing, behavior was completely different from mental processes, and everything that was looked at was only physiological, which means that it was just physical aspects, and no one had entered the realm of understanding that our mental thoughts actually create what behaviors we do and don't do. So what is it that psychologists do? What is it that we look at? Of course, it's conformity, confrontation. There's all sorts of aspects of human behavior that we have to evaluate. And examples of that can be in the classroom can include why is it that some students ask questions in class freely and others would never ask a question. And then there's those in between and different levels of in between. Why is it that some people speak out for others and defend others, and yet there are people that wouldn't defend somebody else and are more concerned about just themselves? All of those things have to do with psychology as well as everything else that you can possibly think of. So now we have to start to look at the people that made it what it is. So when we do, we're going to actually start with somebody that was not a psychologist and had no inkling of even what psychology may be, and that was Aristotle. And Aristotle was all about trying to figure out how the mind and the body work. Do they work together? Don't they work together? And when he developed this thought process of going into body and mind working, he wanted to figure out how can he test it? What can he do? And he's really the one who first came up with our scientific methods. And that has to do with making guesses. What is your guess as to why somebody does something or why they don't do something? He really started that scientific method with hypothesis. And once he figured it out, developed a plan, then he could come up with that theory that went with it. Now, our first actual psychologist that we're going to go into is actually William Wundt. Now, William Wundt is considered the founder of psychology. He, of course, published a book like you'll find all of them did, and his was Principles of Physiological Psychology. Now, remember, physiological means the physical aspects of psychology. He was the first person to actually open a research lab, and the first research lab ever, to just study mental processes. Now, you will have questions on tests, worksheets, that kind of thing that will ask you who was the first person to start the first psychology research lab and who was the first person to start it in the United States. William Wundt was the first one to start it, not in the United States. Now, the other thing that's important about William Wundt is the fact that he promoted that psychology and physiology, or the physical aspects, should be and can be separated into two separate entities. Now, another important aspect has to do with structuralism. Now, structuralism is a word that he created. He just made up a word. And when he made this word up, he also defined it and said that it was the study of consciousness. Now, what did he do with the word? He actually started that first research lab, so he was a lecturer like I am. He lectured to students and taught them about structuralism and what it meant. But did he actually do anything with it, research it, anything like that? And the answer is actually no, not really. The person who actually did something with it was somebody who was sitting in his class. Now, the person who was sitting in his class was Edward Titchener. Now, Titchener, while he was getting his doctorate degree, listened all about structuralism, and he said, all right, well, let's try it. Let's make it what we call the first school of thought. Now, a first school of thought is what we actually call now a theory. So his first school of thought was structuralism. And he said, all right, let's break this down. Let's study it in a lab atmosphere. And he said that it was conscious experiences that we can break down into not only structures, but what he meant by structures was parts of sensations and feelings. So he said, if you're going to have structuralism, then we have to develop a plan on how to test it. And how he tested it was called introspection. So yep, he made up his own word as well. So introspection, to study structuralism, what you're actually going to do is describe all your sensations and the feelings that you're having in order to let us understand what your conscious thought process and experience is at the time. So let's understand introspection first. So let's say one day you're coming into school, one day when we're able to come back into school again, you're coming into school, and before all the activities that happened before you got there was you woke up and your significant other was feeling a little frisky, and so you had sex. And it was wonderful, best sex you've ever had. Now, on your way to school, everything went well. You remembered everything that you needed to remember. You found a perfect parking space, which we all know at SC4 can be a little bit difficult. So you found your perfect parking space, you got into class, and you found that perfect seat where the lighting is just right. You can hear just perfectly. You can look out the window if you want to, or not if you don't want to. Everything just ran wonderfully. So then I come into class, we conduct class, and at the end of class, I ask you to write down or give me your introspection, describing your feelings and sensations that you had during class. Tell me all about it. So that day, you write down how wonderful it went, that you learned a lot, that every aspect of class was perfect. It was just a great day for you. All right, next class, you come in. But this day didn't go so well before class began. So no sex that morning, of course. You forgot your backpack. You forgot your information. You don't even have your pencil. There's nothing going right. When you get to class, maybe even got into an accident on the way to class. No parking spot, of course. Have to park out in BFE. And then you come to class, somebody's sitting in your seat, God forbid. And everything has just gone wrong. But when I conduct class, I've conducted it exactly the same as I did the last time you were in class when things went perfectly. Everything about class is exactly the same. But at the end of class, when I ask you to do your introspection, that's where we run into a problem. What are your sensations and feelings about that day's class? Would they be the same? Can you think when you're fighting with your significant other? Can you understand the concepts that are going on? Excuse me. There are all sorts of things that will interfere with that day's introspection, and which means that therefore interferes with the structuralism or that school of thought. So not only was structuralism the first school of thought to be developed, it was also the first school of thought to disappear. And the reason it disappeared was introspection, or the way to study it, was unreliable. It could be based off your moods. It could be based off of all sorts of different things. It could be based off somebody sitting next to you that has body odor that you don't like. And that changes everything about the way you take in the information around you. So it was deemed as unreliable. Now we can move on to William James. Now, William James brought psychology to the United States. You will be asked who brought psychology to the United States, and that, of course, is William James. He also published a book, Principles of Psychology, and he came up with really our second school of thought. And again, he sort of made up the word, and he came up with functionalism. Now, functionalism remains today. It's not deemed as a school of thought today because it is actually just a basis of understanding for human behavior. And what functionalism is the way that we as humans can adapt our thought processes, our emotions, our conscious level of understanding to whatever it is that's going on around us. So let me explain that. When we look at functionalism, you as a person can adapt the way you behave, the way you act, and the way you think to the situation you're in. So while you're in a classroom, you behave a certain way. You react a certain way. You interact a certain way. So you would speak to your instructor in a certain manner that you would deem as appropriate. Now I want you to put yourself with somebody else. How about your significant other if you have one? Now with your significant other, let's say you would like to have sex. Hopefully you would talk to your significant other in a different tone of voice, with a different behavior than you would with your instructor in a classroom, which means that you have adapted to the situation. Now let's move to another situation. What about grandma? Would you talk to grandma and interact with grandma the same way you do when you're interacting with your significant other when you want sex? I again hope not. So when you are adapting to each and every situation that you are in, that's functionalism. Now again, it was called the second school of thought at the time. It is something that is an underlying understanding that everybody has just taken now for granted that, yep, that's what humans can do. Now functionalism played an important role when it came to Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was a naturalist, but he was not a psychologist in any way, shape, or form. But he took that functionalism and he went, aha, all right, I get it. So psychology created functionalism, and then Charles Darwin ran with it. And what he did was essentially say that an understanding of all humans and how they function and how they've changed over time has come from that adaptation. And then looking at adaptation, he of course wrote On the Origin of the Species, and that was done in 1859, and it had an impact on all scientific thought. It wasn't just in the area of psychology, it wasn't just in the area of astronomy or astrology or anything else. It was all over all spectrums of study. All right, then we go to G. Stanley Hall. Now, G. Stanley Hall is going to become important in many other aspects and not just on this slide. So when we look at G. Stanley Hall, he organized psychology in the United States. Now remember, there were psychology people all over the place. They weren't talking to each other. If they were talking to each other, it was not very nicely. There was just no structure or basis to any of our psychology people in the United States. So he made an organization. That organization still functions to this day, and it's called the American Psychological Association. If you go into the field of psychology in any way, shape, or form, you will become a member of the American Psychological Association. Now, the other thing that's important on G. Stanley Hall is the fact that he established the first psychology research lab in the United States. Okay. Now, on a side note, you will be writing a paper for me in the future. It's in your syllabus. In that paper, you will need to do it under the American Psychological Association writing. So it's called APA format. You may have heard of that. This is where it came from. Now, on your syllabus and in the rubric for your writing that you'll need to do, it will give you all the rules and regulations that I want you to go by for American Psychological Association. If you just follow those rules, you will do everything that I need you to do correctly for APA format for that paper. All right, now we have Mary Calkins. Now, Mary Calkins was the first woman to really try and go through all of the PhD or doctoral requirements for her to get that PhD. Now, she went through it, as you can see, with William James. The problem with it was this. Women at that time didn't have a whole lot of rights, and although she went through everything and did extremely well at it, did she receive that PhD in the end? And the answer, of course, is no. So although she did all the requirements that were there, no PhD was given to her. Now, they did allow her to, because she had completed everything, establish a laboratory at Wesley College. And she eventually became the first woman president of the American Psychological Association. There were other presidents prior to her and after her, but she was the first woman president. mind you, this was during a time when they still didn't allow women to do such things. So psychology really was a forerunner in allowing women to have more rights and that understanding women's intellect long before the rest of the world did. Next woman that we have is Margaret Washburn. Now, Margaret Washburn actually went through the PhD program and actually received that PhD. She was the second woman elected to the American Psychological Association, and she wrote a book called The Animal Mind. Now, The Animal Mind is still used to this day. She was sort of an odd duck, and some of the information in The Animal Mind upset people back then, still upsets some people to this day. But it really was a forerunner in understanding that we as humans are animals and a lot of our thought processes are quite similar, as well as really pushing the understanding that psychology and mental processes are in and of themselves important. It doesn't just have to be about your physical issues, it can be about your mental thought processes. Francis Sumner is next. Now, Francis Sumner studied under G. Stanley Hall. Now, he is the first African American to earn a PhD, receive that PhD, excuse me, and then he became a chairman at Howard University in the psychology department. Big deal, very big deal. Again, psychology was a forerunner in this aspect when at the time no other African Americans were even thought of, again, like women, intellect, the ability to vote, rights, that kind of thing were all really not that existent at the time. Now, here's my man, Sigmund Freud. You're going to find that we cover Sigmund Freud quite often, and a lot of what he's done, a lot of his research is not only been validated, but a huge amount of it in the 90 percentile rank has remained to this day as correct. Now, when he goes wrong, he goes horribly wrong, and we will discuss those and laugh about them, actually. So, here's our first American Psychological Association, that group of 6 people that you see there. It's actually 5 people, but let me explain. Front row, center person is G. Stanley Hall, the one who organized the American Psychological Association. On your right of him is Carl Jung, and on your left of him is Freud. He's the one with the cane. Now, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung did not get along at all. They hated each other beyond all reason. Jung thought he was too fixated on obsessions and obsessed about those fixations. And Freud thought Jung was just off in his own little world and thought everything related to everything when they really didn't. There was actual reasons for them. And so they spent their life actually trying to destroy each other, even though they were both members of the APA. In fact, Carl Jung bought the newspaper in Sigmund Freud's little town so that he could write every single day in that newspaper and have that newspaper all about how Freud was wrong. Everything he did was wrong, all of his thought processes were wrong, and essentially was an idiot. So, of course, Freud did the same thing to him. And if one was speaking at a concert, the other one would show up in the audience and be there to ask questions and to contradict and to just be a pain. If one was on a radio broadcast, then the other one would call in or go right to that radio broadcast to wreak havoc for the other person. They've each actually not only written articles but books to try and destroy the other person's thought process. What we know today is both are right, both are wrong. So you're going to find in all of our psychological theorists that their thought processes all have correct assumptions, all have correct bases to them, but they also have incorrect aspects to them as well. Now the 3 people in the back on this picture. 2 of them actually mean nothing, and I can tell you I don't even know who they are. The middle one that does not look very happy at all. That was Sigmund Freud's biographer. Now, what Sigmund Freud felt, he was maybe a little narcissistic. And he felt that everything out of his mouth, everything that he did was going to mean something in the future. Now, mind you, he was right to an extent. But this biographer followed him everywhere to do everything and documented it all. Now, some of that documentation has worked for us to this day, like arguments that he'd had with people, thought processes that he'd had that he didn't actually write down. So the biographer did, and those have come to fruition, come to be truths in the future, better understandings of his thought processes. Other things were not that important. When I say he followed him everywhere, I mean he followed him everywhere. Bathroom and his bathroom necessities, the bathroom excretions, all of those things were things that were documented. We found that we didn't need that information as much as some of his other psychoanalytic. Now, information that you also need to know about him that you might want to write down somewhere. His theory was psychoanalytic theory. Now, psychoanalytic theory is Psychoanalytic. Psychoanalytic theory. What he used, or the method he used to check his psychoanalytic theory, is called psychoanalysis. Now, his whole thought process, you also need to know, was that there were two main issues. There's more to it, but the two main issues are what we're going to delve into in intro. The main issue with individuals, why they think the way they do, what problems they have, all sorts of aspects like that, come from early childhood events. Your childhood creates who you are as an adult. The main proponents of early childhood events are your parents. So essentially what he says is who screws you up? And that's your parents. And he'll even go further into that. Who screws you up the most between your parents? It is the main caregiver. And the main caregiver to this day, even though we say that we have equal rights, the main caregiver to this day tends to be the mother. So most of the time, the person that can screw you up the most is the main caregiver, which in essence is mom. So your early childhood sets up your future. Number two, the second thing he felt that psychoanalytic theory encompasses, of course, has to do what he's most famous for, and that is sex. When we go through his understanding of your development, we're going to go through what he felt were the erogenous zones of your body and how those erogenous zones link to your behavior in the future. Again, it may sound crazy, but it is actually extremely true. You'll find that when we go through it, just how true that is. So, early childhood events and sex. All right, next theory that we have. So the first theory, when we moved from schools of thought into actually naming them theories, was psychoanalytic theory with Freud. The second theory we're going to discuss is behaviorism. There are three main proponents that we'll discuss in this class of behaviorism: Pavlov, Watson, and Skinner. Pavlov you may have heard through Pavlov's dogs. If you haven't, you will. Watson, Little Albert may be something that you heard of. Again, you'll see a video on Little Albert and understand that Little Albert aspect in the studies he did with small children. And then, of course, we got B.F. Skinner. Now, B.F. Skinner, of course, loved to argue with Freud and loved to dog him, that kind of thing, and everybody else. B.F. Skinner really wanted to say, and really did end up proving, that we don't actually have free will. We'd like to say that we do, but actually it's how we've been trained throughout our life that sets up what decisions we actually make, which means we actually don't get to make any decisions on our own. Now, the whole concept behind behaviorism is it is the study of observable behavior, not the mental processes, because they felt that that was too difficult to understand, but the observable behavior and how did you get to that. The whole point to observable behavior and behaviorism is that you have been trained in your life. You have either been classically conditioned or sorry, had to stop. Operantly conditioned. You're either classically or operantly conditioned. We will go over both classical and operant conditioning so that you'll understand them. They both work. They both work extremely well. If you're potty trained, you've been conditioned. If you've gone through any type of school system on earth, you've been conditioned. So the A or B or C that you receive is a reward for conditioning that has taken place. Behaviors that you do have been conditioned into you. Undoing those conditions can be very difficult. All right, next one that we have is humanistic psychology. Main two proponents we'll discuss are Carl Rogers and Maslow, of course. Maslow, you probably know of his hierarchy of needs. We will briefly discuss those because a lot of high school and AP psychology just delve into that, overdo it, and unfortunately some of them are actually taught incorrectly, so we'll try and correct that thought process. Carl Rogers really worked on human growth, your potential to be the best that you can be, and he worked a great deal on how we counsel and work with you. Okay, so this is all about humanistic psychology is the complete and utter opposite of behaviorism. It's self-determination, the potential of free will, and your potential for human growth. All right, before we go on to the rest of the schools of thought or the rest of the theories that we have, this is actually the point in time when nature versus nurture or heredity versus environment started to really come into play and start to say, well, maybe it's a little bit of both of these things. So let's understand them first. Nature is also heredity. It's your genetics. It is what is handed down to you generation after generation. Some from mom, some from dad, grandpas and grandmas on both sides. All of those are handed down to you, and that is nature, heredity, otherwise known as genetics. On the other hand, there were other people that felt that it was all nurture. You were a blank slate when you were born, completely nothing there, and it would be how you are raised and your other environment around you that would make you who you are. So many of our theorists were either the genetic nature heredity theorists or they were nurture environment theorists. So when we look at that, anybody that has stages of development, they are a nature heredity genetic theorists. Okay, so you're going to go through each of those stages no matter what because it's embedded in you genetically to go through those. On the other hand, the blank slate, the nurture and environment would be like our behaviorists. That we could train you to do anything. We can train you to be anything. What we know today is it is a combination of both of those. And also what we know is a lot of things that we thought were genetic, nature, heredity, are actually nurture and environmental based. A lot of things that we thought were nurture and environmental based are actually nature, heredity, and genetic. So for example, your personality is actually not something that is created once you're born. It is already embedded upon birth, prior to birth. It is genetically embedded. Now the thing about personality is this. I want you to think of the person in your family that you argue with the most, the one that you seem to get into fights with all the time, the one that just aggravates the crap out of you. The unfortunate thing is that your personality is most similar to their personality. And typically in the classroom, I'll have people shaking their head no and actually be quite upset, like, how could you say such a thing? Whoever it is you argue with the most, your personality is mainly based on their personality, purely genetic. So when we look at adopted children that do not have genetics to go with those parents, whose personality is their personality like? Neither one. There can be one they're most similar with. It's like friends. There are friends that you have no genetic basis to, but your genetic personality can be more similar to some of them than others. It's the same way with adopted children. Now, I am an adopted child. I have no genetic history with my adoptive parents at all. Do I have a personality that melds more with one than the other? Yes. Do I have a personality that does not at all meld with the other one? Absolutely. But my personality is neither of theirs. So when we talk about things, when we interact about things, when personality becomes a major aspect of discussions, there can be higher levels of aggression, higher levels of aggravation, higher levels of tendencies not to come to an understanding because there's no basis genetically to get us on the same page. Now, many adopted children grow up and they grow up perfectly fine in those family environments because the parental personalities can be similar again, but there can be more issues. And both of the adoptive parents can many times look at those adopted children and go, where'd they come from? They can't be mine. They can't even joke, oh, that's their father's personality, or oh, that's their mother's personality. It is neither one of theirs. All right, next thing you need to understand before we go on to the rest of the theories is that we now look at it because of that nature versus nurture and its combination of both as a biopsychosocial analysis. Biopsychosocial. Now, I need you to understand each aspect of that biopsychosocial approach. Bio stands for the biology, the genetics behind you, how your brain runs, your neurotransmitters, what sensations and how you take in those sensations, not your perception of the sensations you take in. The perception is the psychology or the psycho portion of biopsychosocial. That's your thoughts, your moods, the behaviors, all of that kind of stuff that you have that works off of the biology. Then we have to add in the third portion of the biopsychosocial approach, and that's the social aspect. That is more of your environment. Who has influenced you? What is your cultural background? What education do you have? What relationships, whether they're positive, negative, all of those are a part of your social aspect that also is a part of the approach that we look at. Now we will look at all three aspects when we go into any of our theories. All right, so let's go on to more of our perspective, otherwise known as theories. So we have a cognitive theory. That cognitive theory or perspective is all about your thinking and thought processes. You will have questions that will come up on test after test about which perspective is it that is all about your thinking or all about your thought processes, and that is always going to be the cognitive theory or the cognitive perspective. Why we think the way we do, how our thought processes work, our memories, whether they work or not. Then we have the sociocultural aspect. That is taking that biopsychosocial and looking at the social aspect, including the culture that you come from. What attitudes do we have about others? What attitudes do we have about ourselves? What are the things that are automatically locked into us culturally because we've been taught them for so long that thinking a different way can be extremely difficult? Behavioral genetics is next. Of course, what is your instinct? What is your fallback based off of genetics? Neuroscience is the most up and coming and the one that has the most study behind it now because it's actually the easiest to study. And so we'll discuss neuroscience quite often. Psychodynamic. All right. Psychoanalytic by Freud, then became psychodynamic later on. They are essentially the same thing. The main thing the psychodynamic theory did was try and remove as much of the sex aspect that the psychoanalytic theory had. So when it moved to psychodynamic, it's all about your childhood. It's all about those early childhood events and the conflicts that still plague you to this day. Now, when we, or I, discuss the psychoanalytic theory or the psychodynamic, you'll probably hear me use the terms interchangeably because they are so similar. It is just the removal of that sex aspect because you got to remember, well, during Freud's time, they really didn't discuss sex, and even to this day, sex is not a topic of discussion. And so when it's brought up, people will shut down, close off, and not want to participate. So they moved into this psychodynamic to create the atmosphere of interaction and understanding. Next one we have is behaviorists, behaviorism. We already discussed them with Skinner, Pavlov, and Watson, and it's all about being conditioned, it's all about being trained, and that blank slate. Evolutionary aspect. Again, this is interchangeably a lot with genetics. What is it that has been embedded in us from the get-go to make us think a certain way, make us react a certain way? Now, when it comes to evolutionary perspective, we're going to talk about the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, the way you react to danger and the way you calm down. That is in particular an evolutionary topic. Now, when we look at psychology and the subfields that there are, we have basic research, we have applied research. Basic research can be done in an analog field. Now, analog stands for where they do it in a research lab. They're not doing it with the actual individuals. They're creating a thought process that later on they can test to see in the field if it actually works. Now, we can look all the way at the bottom of this list and see positive psychology there. Now, with positive psychology, this is an area that there's something that happened to you that you can help to understand this analog compared to doing it with individuals. So in positive psychology, they were thinking, when people get most valuable player and they're top in their class and they're valedictorian or salutatorian, boy, they have a lot of confidence. So positive psychology started doing research and found lots of articles, found lots of information that said those that receive awards have high levels of confidence. So they came out and said, all right, you want your children to have high levels of confidence, then you need to reward them regularly. So you may know of participation rewards. Participation rewards are what they came up with. Give everybody a reward and everybody will start to perform at that higher level. Of course, there was a mistake in that thought process. What we actually found out later after they developed this and implemented it was that people that work hard to receive those rewards have high levels of confidence. People who are just given rewards not only do not develop high levels of confidence, it actually reduces their levels of confidence. So then positive psychology came out and said, whoops, sorry about this. Let's fix this, and we're going to take away participation rewards. We're never going to do them again because they actually make things worse when it comes to a child's confidence level. Hasn't happened. We still have participation rewards. The teachings that came out with positive psychology were so strong that parents refuse to undo participation rewards because they still firmly believe that it will build confidence. And in fact, parents have gone to the next level where they reward their children constantly for not doing much of anything, if anything at all. And creating children that have low levels of self-confidence, inability to perform when needed, and actual fear of performing. In addition to that, job atmospheres are having a real hard time because it used to be if you got a paycheck, you were rewarded for your work behavior. If you were not spoken to by your boss, then you must have been doing a good job. Now we have where we have to evaluate people on a regular basis because they need that positive reinforcement because that's what they've gotten all through their life. They need a pat on the back. If you are a person who while you're at work says, I'm not going to work here, I'm going to quit because nobody ever tells me I'm doing a good job, then that is the person that we have created through this participation reward. You want a reward for existing. A paycheck isn't enough a reward. You need more than that. And this has created a very narcissistic society that is, we are finding difficulties undoing that narcissistic thought process. Now, applied psychology on the opposing side in the orange is where they actually do the studies with, it can be animals, it can be humans. It has to be done in the field eventually before they come out with the information. So when I did my doctorate degree, it was in applied psychology. So it was done as a study with humans. And of course, I did it at SC4. Now, when we look at psychology and the professions that go with it, it has been in the past that psychiatrists were a completely sort of different entity than all the rest of the field. Psychologists are either medical doctors or DOs. They're the physician that you go to, and they can prescribe medications. And then all the rest of the field includes psychologists, therapists, counselors, all of those kind of things. Now, these two separations are actually coming closer together. And mainly it's because of our Department of Defense making psychologists capable of prescribing medications. Not all states are doing that as of yet, but the more that do it, the more psychologists are becoming closer in understanding an entity as a psychiatrist is. Now, how can we apply psychology to you and to your classes? We can do it with an understanding of how you can test better. Some people don't do well at tests. They get very anxious when a test comes up. So one of the studies that has been done is how can we reduce that anxiety? How can we get people to test better, and especially those that say that they don't test well? So for those that don't test well, what is it that you can do? First of all, the more you test yourself, the better you get at tests itself. The more you test yourself, the more your brain develops a path to retrieve the information the same way each and every time, so you can not only become quicker for a time test, but be more effective getting and retrieving the correct information. So the more you test yourself, the better you get. Now, the other thing is you need to make connections in your brain to actively process the material. So many people will say to me, well, I've read it 100 times and it just won't go in. You're not making connections in your brain to get that information in there. And we're going to discuss how to make those connections easier, especially when we go through the memory portion of class. The other thing that they have found through research is spaced rehearsal. Now, spaced rehearsal is this. You've never been taught how to study, ever. Schools have sort of set it up by putting so much information in for you to get that they've actually created a cramming test study method, when that is not and has been found to be the worst possible way to study. So you study for 4 hours one night for the test the next day. That's the bad stuff. Spaced rehearsal. So for today, after you've listened to the lectures, you've gone over it, later on in the evening, come back to it within 24 hours, anytime within 24 hours, and just peruse it. I mean, go over it quickly. Bring it back to memory. That spaced rehearsal works much better. It also says for spaced rehearsal, no more than 20 minutes of studying at a time. So for 20 minutes of studying, you're going to get to a point where you need 10 minutes up after 20 minutes, physically get out of a chair, walk around. After 10 minutes, come back, and you can do another 20 minutes. Never more than 20 minutes. Otherwise, your brain can't take all that information in and keep it unless it is in working memory. So, for example, what is that? You study the night before, you come to take a test, and instead of getting the test, you get lecture first, where you have to take notes. Many students don't want anything to do with that. They want you to give them the test right then. Why do you want us to give you the test right then? Because it's in working memory, which means you haven't made the connections to keep it there. And once you're done with the test, it can actually be gone, completely gone, never to be remembered again. Next thing we think is that people overestimate their understanding of the information they're getting. So they think they're better at it than what they are. So what we suggest and what they've found by research is to get out those old 3x5 cards that they used to use in K through 12 and put the information on one side, the answer on the other, and then study those over and over and over again. And the more you study, the more familiar you are, the more it's going to be embedded in your brain. The other thing is you can get a grasp of your understanding or mastery. You can put them in piles of, yep, I got that, nope, I don't got that, I sort of got this, but I'm not confident on it. And then you can work on the ones that you don't have the thorough mastery of. So they've also come up with a couple of study skills to go along with it. Now the first one we're going to discuss is called the SQ3R. The SQ3R has to do with book studying, or for me a PowerPoint package. Look ahead at the chapter you're about to go over in class or about to have a lecture on. Survey it is what they say. Any questions you come up with, write them off to the side, even using them in your mind. The more you question something, later on when it's discussed, the answers will be able to come readily to you. Then read afterwards, looking for answers, looking for better understanding. Recite means always do it out loud. We have found that you need an auditory. You need to hear it as well as see it in order for you to understand it and make those connections to keep it there longer. And then, of course, those 3x5 cards. Review, review, review as much as possible. Now, when it comes to lectures, we have the RSQC2. Now, that means to recall points. So after you hear my lecture today, later on you start to recall things from that lecture. Write them down. Summarize. Put it in your own words. There's those questions again. Bring up questions that you have. Try to find the answers for those questions. Make connections to your real life. The more you can make connections to your real life, the better. And that makes connections that will be embedded and not be removed later on. Comment, again, make it out loud, make it auditory. Say those 3x5 cards out loud. What do you think about the class? Even if you think it's stupid, talk about it to yourself, talk about it to somebody else. Those comments will bring about the auditory aspect of it, bring in the connections, and make you remember the information better. Distributing your study time, we briefly went over already. 20 minutes at a session, no marathon sessions. Reviewing those notes within 24 hours. It has to do with your brain, and it's called dendrites, and whether these dendrites make connections. If they've made the connection, will they go away or not? If you review your notes within 24 hours, the dendrite will be embedded, which means it won't just float away and go away later on. Thinking critically means to understand the information the way it's been given to you, not biasing that information to what you think it should already be. And then, of course, to overlearn, which we also discussed already. Overlearn, keep practicing over and over and over again. Now, actively processing the information. How can you actively process the information? What we find is schools are based off of left brain learning, and we're really going to go into left and right brain in just a second. But it's based off left brain learning. And so many can function very well off left brain learning, but we find that also many do not. And they need to bring in the right side of their brain. Even those that function severely well at left brain learning, if they bring in the right side, they're going to do even better. So what is the right brain learning that can help? It's visualization, otherwise known as mental imagery. Make a mental image or a picture in your mind to represent that object that's not physically there, and you'll remember it better. Again, when we go into memory, we're going to discuss this more, and we're also going to discuss left compared to right brain. That visualization and mental imagery is a right brain activity. So we need to find out, are you more left brain, are you more right brain when it comes to school? How we're going to find out whether you're more left brain or more right brain is going to do with a game called Would You Rather. Now, I don't know if you've ever played it, but the first time I ever played it, had never heard it, was with quite a few girlfriends at our local pub. And we had had too much to drink, quite honestly. And so one of my friends had stated, have you ever played this game, Would You Rather? So of course I hadn't, so I was the first one to get the first question. Now, my first question, of course, if you've played it, had to do with sex, some kind of activity that is just wrong on all sorts of different levels. And to this day, right now while I'm speaking about it, I have goosebumps. And I have goosebumps because I still remember that question. And no, I'm not going to repeat the question to you. I'd like to keep my job. But for that question, I still remember it to this day because the mental image I can't get rid of on either side of it. So would you rather is one disgusting thing or the other disgusting thing. You have to choose one of them. And I still remember both disgusting things, the activity that was going on. It's just a horrible thought process. But why is it I remember it? I remember it because of the image, the mental image that's there. So think of it this way. If you ever go into an old folks home or know particularly old people, you will find that they can remember a dirty joke better than they can remember anything else. Now, that dirty joke, why is it they can remember it? Because the mental imagery that goes along with it. Sex works for mental imagery. So if you come up against something that you can't remember, what does it sound like? What does it rhyme with? Can you come up with some kind of sexually explicit thing that can go with it? You don't have to tell anybody about it. Nobody has to know how you're remembering it. But if you can get it to be, number one, gross, number two, sexually involved, you're going to remember it for a very long time. All right, so now what I want you to do is, I can tell that you can see the slide, but I want you to close your eyes, please. Because we need to use mental imagery, and mental imagery is closing your eyes while you're creating the picture in your mind. So we're going to do this for a few slides, and I want you to close your eyes, come up with a mental picture. Then I'm going to tell you to open your eyes because that will wipe that slate clean, and then close your eyes again for the other side. So we're going to start with this one. It's really an easy one. Would you rather be the older or the younger sibling in a family? So right now, close your eyes. While you're closing your eyes, I want you to imagine the oldest sibling in your family. If you're an older child, then think of a family that's close to you and imagine the oldest sibling in that family. Even if you're the oldest sibling, whoever it is, I want you to create a mental picture. I want you to think to yourself, what are they doing? How tall are they? Hair? What are they dressed like? Anything around them, where are they at? Every aspect, create that in your mind until you can see the oldest sibling clearly and what they're doing clearly. All right, now open your eyes and close them again. Now this time when you're closing your eyes, I want you to imagine the youngest sibling. Again, in your family or in some family that's close to you, but imagine the youngest sibling. What are they wearing? What are they doing? Where are they at? Imagine everything that you can about them. Once you get the mental picture of that youngest sibling, then I want you to open your eyes. Now, between the two of them in the game Would You Rather, I would ask you, which would you rather be based off that mental picture, the oldest sibling or the youngest sibling? Now, many times, many people will picture an oldest sibling that gets to do more. They had lots of friends. You got to tag along with them if you're a younger sibling. The parents seem to trust them more. There's all sorts of positives that can go along with the oldest sibling and why you want to be them. There's also many negatives. The oldest siblings are also the test run, so they didn't get to do things until much later than younger siblings do. Or they had far more rules than younger siblings do. There's all sorts of things that can also be negatives to go with the older sibling. You will base which one you choose off of whether you see them and picture them in a more positive light or in the more negative light on what their surroundings were. Same with the younger sibling. You'll pick being the youngest sibling because youngest siblings are well known for being spoiled rotten. They're well known for not having a whole lot of rules. They're well known for just getting away with murder, and it's acceptable. Younger siblings are also well known for being the baby of the family, and because they're the baby, sometimes that being babied makes them not be able to do some things or their parents not be able to let go of them. So there can be negatives associated with it as well. So again, positives, negatives based off of that mental imagery. All right, we're going to go to the next one. I do not want you to look at the slide. I want you to close your eyes now. And then here's what our slide is. Would you like to be half your weight and half your height, or double your weight? So I want you to picture yourself at home looking at a full-length mirror. Now picture yourself in your mind's eye. How tall are you? Make it so that you scrunch your body down to half your height. Now, I'm 4'9". That's not half my height. That's the full. So at 4'9", I would be 2 foot 4.5 inches, probably not even to the kneecaps of most of you. So this is a terrifying thought process for me. But I want you half your height. Now, you don't get to be half your weight. Your weight is going with you. You're going to be squished down and wide to go with it. Okay? Now, I want you to open your eyes, close your eyes again. This time when you close your eyes, I want you looking in that full-length mirror again. And while you're looking in that full-length mirror, I want you to see it at your normal height. But I want you to double your weight. Double everything about you. Double your head size. That skull is gargantuan. Your neck is huge. Go to your shoulders and double their width. Your arms are double their length and width. Now for females, go down to your chest and yep, double that. Then go down to your stomach, double it. Baby got back on the back side. Yep, you have to double that, whether you're a man or a woman. Now men might enjoy the going around to the front on this and doubling. Double the thighs, the legs, the feet. Now look at yourself, completely doubled on every aspect of who you are in that mirror. Now again, with this would you rather, you would have to pick half your height, double your weight. Unfortunately, I get lots of students that will say, "Don't take double my weight because I could lose it." That's not the way the game's played. You get to stay that way. Close your eyes. All right, now what I want you to imagine is that you are in front of a classroom of 30 psychology students. I typically stand at the front of the classroom. You're going to come up front with me. Now you are going to have your mind and body taken possession of, and you're going to look out in your mind's eye at that class of 30 students. And then I want you to imagine that you don't have control over your hand. And I'm going to have you pick that finger up and pick your nose in front of class. Now, not just a little bit, not just at the end, not to scratch or anything like that. I want you to dig for gold in that nose. All the way up there. Now I want you to imagine in your mind's eye the way everyone's looking at you. The look of disgust, the look of, oh my God, what are you doing? I want you to imagine that while you're picking your nose. And then you grab that big booger that is in there and you're trying to dig it out and pull it out. And as you pull it out, there's that, of course, nice string that's attached to it. And look at the class again and what they're looking at you like. Okay, open your eyes. Close your eyes again. This time, I want you to sit in a chair, and in your mind's eye, you're sitting in that same classroom. But this time while you're sitting in that classroom, there's somebody sitting next to you. I want you to imagine somebody sitting next to you, even if it's from a past class, from work, I don't care. But picture somebody sitting next to you. You turn toward each other so that your knees are towards each other. Now you notice that the person across from you has a booger in their nose. Again, taking possession of you, you have no control. I want you to reach over and get it for them. You've already tried to tell them they can't get it. They don't know what you're talking about. So you're going to be polite and you're going to get it for them. I want you to dig up in there. Grab that booger. It's in the end of your fingernail. Pull it out. And as you're pulling it out, of course, comes that long, loopy, string-like thing that snaps back and gets you in the hand. Open your eyes. Again, with the game of would you rather, you would have to pick between picking your own nose or picking somebody else's. All right, close your eyes. Now, as you close your eyes, I want you back at home. While you're at home, I want you to go to the refrigerator, please. Open that refrigerator, and I want you to grab the milk. Grab a glass from the cupboard. Set the glass down. Set the milk down. Open the milk container. Now you noticed as you were grabbing that milk that it looked a little funky, that it was strange. It was sort of yellowy, clumpy, tingy, strange. Now when you open it, I want you to, in your mind's eye, think of that horrific smell of soured milk. The smell takes possession of you. Take the cap, set it down. Pick up the milk, and I want you to start to pour it into the glass nice and slow. As you're pouring it into the glass, the first thing that happens is a nice flat yellowed surface comes through the spout of the milk and down into the glass, sliding along it, and sort of plops at the bottom. Now, as you continue to pour, there's more clumps. There's like cottage cheese looking things. There's different varieties of color. There's clear, there's really gloppy white, there's yellow, there's all variations of those colors as you're getting it a quarter of the way up to the top of the cup, halfway, now 3/4 of the way. Pour it until it's about 3/4 of an inch to an inch away from the top of the glass. Now I want you to, in your mind's eye, pick that glass up. Bring it to your mouth. Lay the lip of the glass on your bottom lip. Take a good smell of that rotten, soured milk. Now tip that glass up as that rotten, soured milk touches your lip, your tongue, the top of your lip, and you can feel the grimy sliminess of it. All right, open your eyes and close them again. Now, this time, your other option is going to be back in the classroom, so I want you to pretend you're in a classroom. You're going to come up to the front of the class with me, and this time you brought that glass. Of course, you've cleaned it. There's no more sour milk in it. It's a nice, clean glass. You brought it with you to class. Now, as you brought it with you to class, what we're going to do is have each and every person in that classroom spit into that glass. Now, we're not going to spit politely with a nice little poo kind of spit. We're going to hock a noogie. So in that glass, I'll start it off. I'll grab the glass and I'll go, and then I'll spit into the glass. And you're going to watch as that clump of snot with all the saliva around it and the bubbles with it slide down the side of the glass. Now I'm going to hand that glass to the first person in class, and then you hear them and spit and watch their snot bubble with saliva sliding down the glass. And then the next. And on until we have all 30 students plus myself, including yourself. And so now I want you to look at that glass and I want you to see 31 globules of snot, each individual snot encompassed in its own round ball of saliva with all the bubbles of saliva in between it. Take that glass, bring that glass to your bottom lip, tip that glass up until you can feel the bubbles. You can feel that first globule of snot touching your lip and your tongue. All right, open your eyes. Again, for would you rather, you'd have to pick between one or the other. All right, close your eyes again, and we're going to go on to my favorite one. So now I want you in the classroom. I want you sitting in that chair. There's somebody sitting next to you, and it is the dirtiest hobo you have ever seen. Now, we've all seen one, whether it's on television, in person, and you were horrified by how dirty that person was and how they lived. And it could be, the saddest situation, the grossest situation, whatever comes to your mind. I want you to remember that person. Now, that person's sitting next to you. Your knees are facing each other. I'm going to have that individual bring one of their feet up and lay it across the knee of the other leg. Now, I want you to look at that foot. It's horribly dirty. It has been walking through muck and dirt and filth for so long that it actually looks like it has the sole of a shoe on it without the rest of the shoe. But you figure out and find out that that's not the sole of a shoe. That's actually just filth, grime, mud, toe fungus, what is it called, toe jam, that kind of stuff, all seeping through the toes, on the top, on the bottom, all over, and the smell is horrifying. Now we're going to make it worse. So I have mayonnaise with me. You can choose whatever mayonnaise you want. Do you want Hellmann's? Do you want Miracle Whip? I don't care. But I will take that and use a knife to put a nice thin slather of it on that hobo's foot. Now, many people ask me, how much mayonnaise do I get? You get a thin layer. You know when it's so thin, it's clear? That's the thin layer that you're going to get. Now, you have to lick the thin layer of mayonnaise off that hobo's foot. So I want you to imagine as I try and lift that foot up to you, you're bringing your head down toward the foot. Your tongue is sticking out, ready to take that first lick. All right, open your eyes. Now close your eyes again. This time what we're going to do is we're going to eat dog's earwax. That's the comparison thing, the choice that you have. Now if you have never seen dog's earwax, let me describe it to you. I want you to imagine a dog, your dog if you have one. If not, you can borrow mine. But we will take a tongue depressor and we're going to dig in that dog's ear and we're going to scoop it around and we're going to pull it out. Now when we pull it out, there will be dog hair embedded in it. There will be bugs like mosquitoes, little black things that you don't even know what they are. Maybe an earwig or two. That earwax that comes out is not white or that yellow that we have. It is yellow, it is green, it is black. There's sometimes like a bloody look to it. Never understand why. There's all clumpy. It's gooey. There's all sorts of lovely aspects to it. Now, as we pull that earwax out, I want to think of the best grilled cheese sandwich you've ever had. Now, with that grilled cheese sandwich, when you pull them apart, the cheese was so thick that it just drooped in between. That's what actually happens with that dog's earwax. As you're pulling the earwax out, you will see that just like that cheese drooped, the wax will droop way down and come up and then eventually separate from the ear. Now, as it does, I want you to take your tongue in your mind's eye and put that tongue underneath of that long droop and start slurping that droop up all the way to the earwax. Okay, open your eyes. Now, many of you might be saying, why is it that we had to visualize these disgusting things? First, we have to open up what's called the corpus callosum between the left and the right hemisphere of your brain so we can get you to use both sides equally. When you use visualization, you open that thing up so that you can use both sides equally. So if you were a scam artist and decided you were going to skip this portion, I'd go back and do it so that you can actually open up that corpus callosum to work and function at its maximum capacity. Second reason we did this, if you can get your mind to start to visualize even the most gross, disgusting things and simple things like what I've gone through, then you can get it to visualize the more extreme or difficult or things that are more difficult to come up with a concept or a picture of. So remember that when you're trying to memorize something that is difficult to remember, that you need to visualize it. Visualize it gross, visualize it sexual, and you will remember it. I promise you. And that's exactly what this says. Visualization. Visualize it and you're going to remember it better than anything else that you can. Gross or sexual. All right, the second half of our first chapter has to do with more the theory aspect and how we study those theories. All right, we're going to go into three things that are fundamental to psychology and three things that you may not have thought about in the past that are part of psychology. The first one we're going to discuss is hindsight bias. Now, hindsight bias is always, we call it the I knew it all along phenomenon. I knew it all along phenomenon, meaning that anything that you learn, you will remember that you've heard it before, seen it before, something like that. That's called hindsight bias. You actually did not know it before in many instances. So let's take a look at it. Let me explain it. Let's say you have a friend, and the friend gets together with another friend of yours. They start dating each other. And as soon as they start dating each other, you say to yourself, I knew it all along. They're great together. I knew they'd be great together. It's fantastic that guy got together. I just knew this would work out. What happened there is that you had dendrites established for the one friend. You had dendrites established for the other friend. And when you found the two friends were together, those dendrites actually connect to each other in your brain to signify the connection of them. Now, as soon as that dendrite connects, your brain is unable to decipher and understand that it's a new dendrite, and this was not something you've always known. Dendrites make you believe that it was something you've always known. So let's go to the second half. Now these two break up. A dendrite will be connected that says that these two should have been disconnected in the first place. And that dendrite says, you knew all along it wouldn't work out. You knew he was a jerk or she was a jerk or whatever, but you knew it all along that it wouldn't work out. Anytime you think to yourself, I knew it all along, I want you to remember now that that was a dendrite that was immediately and instantaneously built, and you actually did not know it all along, but your brain is making you think that you did. Next one that we have is overconfidence. Now, overconfidence, the example that we're giving here is an anagram. So there's 3 anagrams down there, water, entry, and barge. And what we've done with humans is say, all right, if we gave you 5-letter anagrams that you had to switch around and make into a real word, how long would it take you to do it? Most humans say, oh, about 10 seconds each. That would work. And I could do it in that amount of time. And what we actually find out is it's 3 minutes each. So that 10 seconds is an overconfidence in your capabilities, thinking you can do things better than you can. So another example, let's go school-based example. How many of you have started to write a paper the night before it's due and thought to yourself, oh, I can pop one out in 3 hours flat? And then you get 4 hours in, 5 hours in, 6 hours in, and you're like, oh my God, I should have started this earlier. I really thought I could get it done. I'm not getting it done in time. That's overconfidence. Many people will study for a test and they'll be done and they'll be like, I got this. Everything's wonderful. They get in to take the test. They don't got this. That's overconfidence. We as humans naturally do it. Our brain naturally does it. We have to consciously work to understand that whatever we think we can do it in, we might need more time. We might not know it as well. Now, the top anagram, where you can see it, what is the solution to this anagram? OCHSA. It's actually chaos, which leads me into our next one of the 3. So for the next one of the 3, it is rage for order. We as humans have a rage for order, which means we will make things not coincidental in our mind. There must be a pattern, even if there is no pattern. Coincidences are made into real random things. We think people are cheating when they're not actually cheating. It randomly happened. So there's all sorts of things where we have created order where there is no actual order. So I want you to think back to the MEP test that you took or the SAT or anything like that. And they showed you a picture of a pattern and then another picture of a pattern and maybe a third one. And then they said, which pattern comes next? Did you know that those could not actually have any pattern at all, and your mind will create the next pattern? And many of those tests were based off of that. All right. The next thing that we have is called the scientific inquiry. Now, we have to go over the scientific inquiry because of some theorists that came out there actually in the recent past that really screwed things up, and we have been unable to undo those screw-ups. So it's scientific inquiry that we're looking at. There are 3 portions to it. The first portion has remained the same. It's curiosity. You're asking questions. You're developing hypotheses. Why does this happen? Why doesn't that happen? You come up with questions. That remains the same as it always has. The second portion of scientific inquiry is skepticism. That's a newbie. Now, the reason it's new is that when you are developing a hypothesis and you say, I think this happens because that thing made it happen, you have to be skeptical of your own thought process. You can't go into testing your data and doing research for whatever inquiry or curiosity that you have unless you're looking for the things that also disproves what you think. That's a major thing. You must try to disprove yourself in order to prove that it actually is true. So that skepticism creates that doubt. Well, I'm not really sure, so let's see if it doesn't work as well as it does work. You always look for things naturally that fit into your schema, as they call it, your thought process. It fits what you want it to fit. That is what, if you're in science, you must go against completely. Now, why did this come up? Why did we all of a sudden develop skepticism? Oh boy, well, that has to do actually with shots for children, otherwise known as vaccinations. If you yourself don't believe it, you probably know of somebody that believe that vaccinations cause autism. No matter how much we've proven that it does not, people still believe it beyond a shadow of a doubt and will not listen to any other options whatsoever. They won't listen to anything that disproves them. Why is that? That's because there was an actual study done, and it was done by a gentleman who had a friend who had a child with autism. And this friend said, hey, you're a researcher. Maybe you can help me out and try and figure out how come this is caused? What happened here? What can we do to fix it? So he did it all for the right reasons. Mind you, did it all for the right reasons. But went into the studies and he asked them questions. He asked that parent of that child with autism questions. He developed a question list, and then he went to another parent of a child with autism, asked them, and another, and another. He never questioned parents of children without autism. If you know anything about science, that automatically disqualifies your scientific study because you don't have a control group. You must have a control group. That also states that he was only looking for specific answers. And what he was looking for was based off the questions he had with the very first people that he talked with. And he asked, all right, when did you start really seeing some of these behaviors? And those behaviors happened around 18 months to 2 years of age that the parents could think of. So what also happens at that time but vaccinations. And so when he talked to all these other parents, they also had vaccinations. They also saw these same things at around the same time. And he had this light bulb moment that went, boom, that means the vaccinations caused this. Now, he was getting paid money, not just a living wage, well above living wage, for him to do this study and not do any other job. So he was getting paid for it. Not only that, he's going to get paid in advance for the results that he was going to come up with. And as he was turning in the information, the lead was that it always was the vaccinations that caused this, so that was the whole thought process. Now, mind you, he did find out before he published that countries that do not do any vaccinations at all have the same percentage of rates of autism that countries with vaccinations do. So if vaccinations cause autism, then how do countries without vaccinations have autism at all? That disqualifies everything. In addition, parents of children that do not have autism also get vaccinations. Now, that might not automatically disqualify it, but it should say that there might be something else at play here. And he didn't take that into consideration because he never even looked at that aspect. Now, of course, once he published, got lots of money, even more money than he was making off of it before, and he stuck with it. Now, back then, it was a whole thought process was that if you publish something, you must die with that publication, meaning that you can't just change your mind. You're not allowed to publish something one day and then the next day get paid to publish something that completely disqualifies what you already said. And so once you publish, you die with what you published. You stick with it, okay? But he published without skepticism. He published without even looking at it. He published this information and then found out prior to publication and then after publication massive quantities of information that said he was completely wrong. And so they developed the third part to our scientific inquiry. And the third part of our scientific inquiry is humility. The ability to admit when you are wrong. No, he didn't do that. Nope, he hasn't done that. So that's why this was created. You must do that now. If you find out afterwards, whoops, I made an incorrect judgment. I didn't do the skepticism I should have done. I'm wrong, and I need to fix that wrong. You need to correct your wrongs. Now, of course, he has been, he's lost his jobs. He's been disqualified as a researcher. All of those things, but he has such fervent backing. Do you know the people that back him actually support him, send him money so that he can live? This is an issue that we have, that we created the scientific inquiry parts to try and counteract that kind of behavior from ever happening again. Which leads us to the scientific method. Now, you've probably heard the scientific method in many other aspects in your life, especially if we've gone through school. Now, the scientific method can have several different steps, shortened variety of steps. It depends on which area you're going into. Some have 7 steps, some have 4 steps, whatnot. We're going with 4. The first step, you're going to develop your hypothesis, and then you have to verify it empirically, which means that you have to have the data that tests it to prove it's right or wrong. You're going to design a study to make sure that you're skeptical and collect the data from that. You analyze that data, you come up with your conclusions, what are otherwise known as theories, and then you report those theories. Now, a big aspect that has also been added to this because of the vaccination thing is that you have to be able to replicate it. Now, the vaccination thing has never been replicated again. Replicated means you have to be able to do it over and over and over again and always get the same findings. So many studies that come out, they'll do a study and they'll say, we did it on 10 people and this is what we found. That's not a study you're going to stick with. You need a study that has been done over and over and over again and always comes up with the same results. Okay, replicated. Now we need to get into some terms that go along so that while we go through this class, whenever I say them, you'll understand what we're talking about. First, we have naturalistic observation. In psychology, we like to use the naturalistic observation the most we can. When we observe people in their natural environment, they behave the most the way they typically do. The natural setting brings about natural behaviors. So if at all possible, we'd like natural observation to take place. Case study is a single person or a small group. So I mentioned a group of 10. That's a case study because it's a small group. So you've probably been taught case studies just an individual, but it actually includes small groups as well. When you get into groups of thousands of people, then that's not a case study any longer. Okay? The case studies give us lots of what we call qualitative data, which means in-depth data, but maybe not numbers to go with that data, which is quantitative data. Next, we have survey is some type of questionnaire. You get them from classes sometimes. Well, they'll say on a Likert scale, 1 through 6, did you like the lectures? Did you like this instructor? That's a Likert scale. That's a type of survey. It takes opinions, behaviors, that kind of thing of groups. Next terms we have a sample. When we do research, we can't do it on everybody because that's just impossible. So we have to do it on a sample of the population, otherwise known as a segment of the population. So the 2 main samples that we're going to go over will be a representative or random sample. Representative sample represents the larger population. So for example, when I did my research at SC4, I did not do it with every student that attended SC4, but I did a representative sample. Excuse me. At the time, we had a percentage rate of 52% female. So my representative sample had 52% female. There were percentages of African Americans. There were percentages of American Indian. There were percentages of each different ethnic or cultural group, and I did a representative sample of those ethnic and cultural groups. So it must represent the larger population as a whole. Random sampling or random selection is like pulling a name out of a hat. Everybody has an equal opportunity. Doesn't matter what percentage of the population is. We don't pull names out of a hat any longer. It's done by computer now, and they randomly select. But it's just everybody's got an equal chance. Now, research methods that go into what we call experimental methods or correlational methods. Now, the first one we're going to discuss is the correlational studies. Now, a correlational study comes up with what we call a co-relationship. So it sort of sounds like these two interact with each other, but we don't see why. We can't see the basis of it as of yet. So there's an awesome YouTube video that I really like that shows a correlational relationship. And that's what we're going to have next is this co-relationship. So we had the positive psychology with the co-relationship. So we're going to look at an additional co-relationships that will be discussed. As soon as I can get it up. All right, so discuss correlational information more. I want you to look at this as an understanding. It comes in three different methods or ways. There can be a positive correlation, there can be a negative correlation, or there can be no relationship or no correlation, otherwise known as null. So I want you to look down at the bottom of the slide, and it says height versus shoe size. Now, if you've ever had a dog or gotten a dog, they'll look at the puppy's paws and they'll go, oh, that's going to be a big dog if it's got big paws. You can sort of do that with children, too. Look at their little feet, and if it's got big feet for the little body, then we're probably going to have a big child or a tall child. But there are many other things that come into play that can alter that. So what we found with positive correlations is if their height goes up, their shoe size typically goes up too. Tall person with tiny feet, very uncoordinated. Tall person with big feet, much more coordinated. So both of those would go up, so that's a positive correlation. One goes up, other one comes with it. Negative correlation means they go the opposite direction. So let's say years in school. The more years in school you have, the less likely it is that you'll go to jail or be in jail for long periods of time. Does that mean everybody who has gone to college, who has gotten even a doctorate degree, will never go to jail? No, it's not cause and effect. It's a correlation or a co-relationship. Typically, the more years in school you have, the less likely it is for you to go to jail or be in jail. So one goes up, other one goes down. That's a negative correlation. And then we can go into the null relationship. Null relationship, they've done tests on height and intelligence. First they thought the taller you were, the more intelligent they were, and found out that had nothing to do with each other. Wasn't even close to having a relationship. So then they went, all right, let's see, short people. Do short people have higher intelligence? I can say short people because I'm a short person. And they found that had no relationship either, not at all. So it has a null relationship. So if they both go in the same direction, then they're a positive correlation. Go in opposite directions, negative correlation. And then when there's no relationship whatsoever, it's a zero with a line through it, otherwise known as null. More terms. Variables are anything that can interact with your study, that can change it, vary it at any point in time. It's the things that get in the way. Empirical evidence is the stuff that can be measured. You've got actual data. you can verify that data. Statistical significance is what we're looking for. So if there's a statistical significant difference between your control group, the one that gets nothing, and the one that does get something, then we can say that that something actually works. We have problems right now with many medications that are publicized on televisions in ads that don't have a statistical significance. You'll see that the control group improved by 11% and the group that got the medication improved by 12%. That's not a statistical significance. The placebo effect is a big deal, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. Of course, there's that term replicate again, which means to repeat. Theory is an explanation of your findings, why you believe it happened based off your research. And reliability is the consistency of an assessment. How reliable is it? If I give it over and over and over again, will it get the same results or at least close to the same results? Now the experimental method, that's the opposite of that correlational method. It decides cause and effect. If something happens, then something else will occur because of it. Okay? Now, underneath of that, we have a few terms you need to know. We have the independent variable and the dependent variable. The independent variable is the one that is getting the treatment. So let's say, oh, sex makes everybody think, so let's go with Viagra. I'm going to test me some Viagra, and I will take all my male students, and of those male students, half of them will be the independent variable, or they're getting the treatment, they're getting the Viagra. The other half of them will be the control group. Notice that's not even on the list. The control group is the group that thinks they're getting Viagra, but they're not. They get a pill that looks like it. They get a pill that's colored like it. They get a pill that tastes like it, but actually what's in it is nothing. It used to be called a sugar pill, but we have found that you can't even use sugar because sugar alters your system and your thought processes. So a placebo, or your control group, actually gets a pill of essentially nothing in it, nothing that will alter anything in your body. Okay? So that independent variable that gets the Viagra. The dependent variable depends on the independent variable. So it's the reaction. It is what happens. It is the erection. So the independent variable gets the Viagra, and they have an erection from that. That's the dependent variable. It depended on the independent variable. It was the outcome of the independent variable. Now, what do we have with the control group? Do they get an erection? Absolutely. Not the same percentage of people. There should be a statistically significant separation between the control group and the independent variable group, but they will get erections. The erections will not be as strong, will not last as long, and over time they will start to subside or go away. That's why we need a control group. A control group always has the placebo effect, which means there are some reactions. So, for example, you give somebody headache medication. Sometimes you can give somebody a pill that is not for headaches and their headache goes away. That's the placebo effect. So a placebo effect happens, but doesn't happen as often, doesn't last as long, and over time will disintegrate and go away. Now you can really understand this best with cancer right now. There are many cancer patients that are in the last stages of cancer, and they're on a test, they're on a study, they're on some kind of pill that is under that study. Here's the thing, not all of them are actually getting the pill, but we tend to find almost all of them improve. Their actual cancer will start to go away. It will get smaller. Positive things will happen. Your brain is an extremely powerful thing. If you believe it, it will happen. But the brain can only do it for so long. The brain can only sustain it for so long. So eventually that placebo effect will go away and the cancer will grow again. They'll say the medication isn't working any longer. So that's how strong your brain is. That's the placebo effect. You can even look at it with alcohol. There have been studies where they give people what they think is alcohol, but it's not actually alcohol, but they believe it is. So do they get drunk? I will hear students say, oh no, they don't get drunk. You're wrong. They do. If they believe they are drinking alcohol, your brain will react as if it was alcohol that they were getting, and they will get drunk. Will it last as long? Will it be as significant? All sorts of things like that come into play because of that placebo effect. But can they get drunk from it? Absolutely. Not everyone, but you'll still have a percentage that will, again. Okay, next thing we have is extraneous variables. They're also called confounding variables. They are the things that get in the way. So let's say I'm doing that Viagra study. When I first studied it, every one of my gentlemen had a significant other to have sex with. But then during the study, somebody broke up. They no longer have a person to have sex with. So they're no longer having the erections, and they no longer know how long they last. All sorts of those can confound my study. Okay? Extraneous variables. Now that placebo effect. So ginkgo biloba is a well-known substance out there that's supposed to cognitively enhance you, improve your memory, your concentration, all those things get better. Ginkgo biloba has been tested study after study after study. There's nothing that seems to work. All research has the equivalent of the placebo or control of group with the group that actually takes it, and there's no difference between the two of them. Yet, when I first started doing these lectures, it was a $300 million industry. It's now in the billions of dollars of industry. And why is that? If you believe it works, it works. So you're going to keep using it. That's the placebo effect. Your mind is a magnificent thing and can make you believe things that actually don't work. All right.